Also the gesture toward ecumenism and interfaith. I thought it was wonderful. I actually downloaded the bulletin because, I'm a geek like that, right? So what was the liturgy, right? So Judy and I are watching it taped, and I'm reading the rubrics in the red print. The bulletin was 50 pages long, for one thing, that thing they were all holding. And that, of course, didn't have everything in it, but that was what the congregation got. You think, we used to talk about a bulletin today, the Britannica bulletin, right? But you're going to get a bulletin, 50 pages long, and had all the rubrics, who's doing what, and then some of the, toward the end of the service, there was this, it was not like, you couldn't hear it because the choir was singing and it was on the way out, but the king walked by other leaders of faith, and there was some words back and forth to other leaders of faith about the value of service and how service is a common good, and we pledge ourselves to that common good. I thought it was wonderful in terms of ecumenism and trying to update that very, very ancient, very, very ancient liturgy. Sometimes installation services of pastors can look a bit like coronations, and we don't want that. We certainly don't. Did you hear the handles on the chariot were diamond encrusted? I mean, really, is that in the world today? Anyway, I just thought it was pretty fascinating. So, welcome again, friends. This is our third. I can't see the screen, but I can see here, so I hope that's matching. So, our third class talking about leadership and the confessions. Everybody see that? Okay. Yeah, okay. This is a much more intimate kind of a gathering here. This is kind of nice. So, talking about transformational leadership, and particularly our confessions, and that's where our kind of focus is today. Remember, I found this quote that we've been using that's in the library, or was in the library at Princeton Seminary, where Susan and I actually were in the same graduating class. We didn't know each other too well, and we were in seminary. She was married at the time. I was single, and the married student housing is off campus and kind of far away, so there wasn't nearly as much interaction between the married students and the single students, which was really too bad. But anyway, I do remember her, and a lot of my friends, of course, remember her, and so on. But she would have seen that. Maddie, of course, also at the seminary. And this quote, that the light of learning may illumine the life of piety in service to Jesus Christ. And that kind of hit, those words kind of were, fed into us. I remember them, many of graduates would remember them, as a balance of hand and heart, head and heart and hands, right? If you're learning, right? Our tradition, Presbyterians, we are people who have faith, seeking understanding. It's not blind faith, it's not Pollyanna, it's faith that seeks to understand. We engage our brains and seek to learn. So that's just one of my definitions of transformational leadership. So, and as I told you, I'm using the Book of Confessions study guide by Jack Rogers, and this is the study guide by Steve Shusett. And we just lost Jack Rogers not too many years ago. I want to say 2017, 2016, around then. Awesome man, professor of theology at Fuller Seminary. We talked about being people of the book, and that is, of course, the Bible, right? I noticed, I'm preaching today, I'm very excited. We have to stop probably about quarter after because the communion servers are meeting, right? Anybody a communion server this morning? No? Okay, I have to be there. 9:15, so I know what's happening. But anyway, people of the book, I noticed in that conference room, right off the chancel there's a whole stack. They look like old pulpit Bibles. Anybody know about them? There's like 3 or 4 of them stacked this high. I don't know if they were in the pulpit years ago and now are in that conference room. Anyway, people of the book, right? How many of us have the Bibles on our cell phones now, right? It's pretty cool, right? There's a story of one minister who was very upset about the youth of the church. When he started preaching, it looks like they just, went on their cell phones and were ignoring me. Until one of the younger people said, maybe, Pastor, they're reading the Bible. So you mean the Bible can be on your cell phone? Well, like, absolutely. I can every version of the Bible on my cell phone, right? So you just push the button and you can read it. So the book, One of our watchwords of the Reformation, sola scriptura, right? The Bible alone. And then there was sola scriptura, sola gratia. Anybody Italian? Grace, only grace. Sola fide, faith. Very good. Faith, fidelity, right? So those three are the watchwords of the Reformation. So I moved back to the Bible, if you will. But then, of course, I said we're also people of books. And so we not only have, welcome, we not only have the book, the Bible as the book, but we also have our book of confessions and our book of order, which is, have a handout here. No, all right, sorry. Our book of order, right, which is part 1 and part 2 of our Constitution of our church. And I mentioned this. I think you all had a chance to look at this. If not, anybody not been here? Is this your first time? Anyway, if you want to look at this, we can pass it around. I think it's one of the best study books currently out on the confessions. And if you want to really get into it, that's the book I'd get. You can get it at the pcusa.org/store. How clever, right? pcusa.org, and you'll click on there, and you'll see at the top, and it'll say PCUSA Store. Click on that, type in confessions in the search engine, boom. And I'm sure Amazon. Anybody listen to the radio this morning? NPR coming in, was driving in, they talked about how Jeff Bezos worked for some other company, and he was very early on in the internet work, and he worked with this company, and he says, I really got this figured out. I could go really well in this company. But he said he quit his job. He had a really good job. He quit his job and thought he'd start a bookstore, which eventually became, pretty clever, which eventually became Amazon, which now, of course, is the largest there is, right? Anyway, I thought today, since this is our last time, we might take a look at some 20th century confessions, all right? So confessions, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, that most of us know, have said before. And then we looked a little bit at the 16th century creeds, right, from the years 3 and 4 AD, further into the future, and then the Reformation period, the 1500s, the 1600s, and then today, the 20th century. And two of those that we'll just look at this morning, one is the Confession of Belhar, right? And another is the Brief Statement of Faith. And I have some examples from those two on your handout this morning. So it's interesting, this, looking at the Confession of Belhar, I have two dates up there, 1982 and 2016. So 1982 was when it was written. And it was written in Belhar, which is I think it's in the next slide, which is a city in Africa, South Africa, near Cape Town. Okay, so near the kind of the center there of that country. A lot of Dutch Reformed Christians there, so kind of related to us, right? Reformed, that's us. We're the Reformed tradition. We don't see that term as much. There is, anybody know the RCA Church? There are Reformed Churches of America, not far from us. Oh, the head of the class is always open. The first row is always open. Thank you. So, yeah, when you come at this time, right, you get to come to the head of the class. The Dutch Reformed Church Christians in South Africa, and even today, I think, to some of the Reformed churches, use they have three kind of confessions that they would use. The Belgic, which is out of the Netherlands, I researched. I'd never heard of that one before. The Heidelberg, which we looked at, catechism, right? And the Canons of Dort, which is another city, kind of updated from the Belgic confession. These three confessions, especially the Belgic, Jack Rogers says, they're written in part to show that Reformed Christians were not anti-cultural, were part of the world. Some traditions, they're totally separated from the world. Let's be a separate reality. That's not us. We are engaged in the world. Presbyterians, very much in the history of our country. You all know the first chaplain of the Continental Congress was a Presbyterian, right? John Witherspoon, the Second Continental Congress. He was there. 13 of the signers of the Declaration of independence, Presbyterians, very solidly Presbyterians in that tradition. And not only were we, the church wanted to make sure that we were not anti-cultural, we're engaged in the culture, we're also follow the government. We don't resist the government. It's always the head of the class, is open. So we don't resist. We are involved and respectful of the secular social powers, right? We obey the civil government. This got into trouble in the country of South Africa when it came to enforced separation of races. And of course, we mentioned that a couple weeks ago, the understanding of apartheid. Anybody have any reference to that or story of that or know much about apartheid in South Africa? I've done a little study. Please, yeah.
I stood by the cell where Nelson Mandela was in prison.
Wow, Robben Island.
I visited Robben's Island.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was an Presbyterian at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and we went all out and the fight against
Apartheid, excellent. Yep, yeah.
Desmond Tutu came to talk to us.
Really? So you've been in his presence.
I shook his hand.
You shook his hand. Oh, like don't wash your hand, right? My wife and I met Billy Graham once. You're like, oh, yeah, same thing. Yeah, Bishop Desmond Tutu. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we had it when I think I was in high school. My pastor gave me a book, Move Your Shadow, about apartheid in South Africa. And in this country, we don't have a good history here as well. Colored only, drinking fountains, and all this thing that we saw not too far ago. My mother remembers seeing those signs. Apartheid in South Africa was much more subtle. For example, I remember reading the book. If you sat down at a bus stop, I may have this mixed up, but you'll get the difference. If you sit down at a bus stop, if the bus stop sign is black with white letters, then I could sit there. If the sign was black, or the opposite, if the sign was white with black letters, that meant for blacks only. And that's how subtle it was. You kind of had to know the inside skinny. It was very much enforced separation by the government. This is the way it's going to be. And of course, the Episcopal Church and our church and others at the time said, no, we're not going to go for that, right? So what happened was this led to racially separated churches. So if you were black in South Africa, you would not really walk into the Dutch Reformed Church, because that was the white church. And everybody noticed the words white and black are not in the titles, right? Everybody just knew, right? There was also the Dutch Reformed Church, the DRCA, right? Probably for association or something. That was the black church. So if you're black, you went there. If you were Indian background, you go to the RCA. If you were of mixed race, and they use the word colored, and we don't use that word anymore in this country, but colored meant you were a mixed race, white and black, then you could go to the Dutch Reformed Mission Church. And that's the way it was, right? There was no deviation there. Everybody knew it. It was just the standard practice. So somebody said, hey, maybe the standard practice is not the way to go. Alan Bozak, one of those individuals, African-American man, I actually heard him preach once. In the 80s, he became president of what we call WARC, which is the World Alliance of Reformed Churches. So that's a kind of a worldwide movement, right? Our church is not an international church like the Methodist Church, like the Episcopal Church, right? It's an Anglican community in the world. We're kind of defined by each country, but there's an alliance that we share. Now it's been changed to the World Communion of Reformed Churches, the WCRC. We are a member body of that group. So Alan Bozak, with his leadership in the then WARC, the assembly took an action to declare apartheid a heresy. Guess the reaction of the South African government when they did that, right? They were not too pleased, right? The synod meeting, there was a synod meeting, and they gathered in Belhar, and they drafted a confession. Let's write a confession. Let's say something now about what we believe, right? Given our head knowledge, what we know of God, and what we know of what is happening in the world around us, right, this apartheid, let us engage our hearts because we want to follow Jesus, we want to be devoted to Jesus, and we have to do something. So let's write a confession in this case. They wrote a confession. The government, the statement was released for 4 years of study. So it was, the General Assembly of that church wrote this confession, right? The DRMC, the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, they wrote the confession, and they sent it to the church. Every congregation got a copy. And they said, let's study this for 4 years. And that was the extent of what they wanted. The documents that we have say, at the time, there was no real hope of ending apartheid in South Africa. That wasn't there. That wasn't what they thought would happen. The government was too strong, too well entrenched, too white. And so we're going to say for our churches, this is wrong. Our churches should not be divided like this. We should be together. And of course, apartheid was part of the reason for the division. Let's work to overcome that. Let's have churches where, like the song, red and yellow, black and white, all are precious, right? They are precious in God's sight. Let's work on that, right? And so they started that out, right? In the confession, and this is subtle, I think it was masterful, right? In the confession, the word apartheid is not used, right? Or the government, bad government, bad apartheid. Instead, they talked about unity in Jesus. The government, of course, read the confession and said it was communist. Well, you say something's communist, right? That's bad, very, very bad. We're not going to do this. This is communistic. Russia, China, all no, we're not even going to go there, right? Some would say. So they talked about, instead of using the word apartheid, they talked about Jesus Christ is the only Lord, and through Jesus we have unity, and therefore anything that enforces separation is wrong and is sinful, right? And we should not go there. In other words, we should not go there. So, does anybody know, Susan, oh my goodness, a long time ago, talked about some of the racial tensions and racial struggles in the community of Deerfield. Anybody have an insight or a story about that you could
Everybody does.
Well, I'd like to hear it, because I recall a very vague memory, something about a park and some housing, and what's the local story here that you all know as Deerfield First people?
They wanted to build some integrated housing, and Deerfield couldn't stand for it. They had a different election, another election to reclassify the zoning.
Oh.
The park is now called Floral Park instead of Mitchell Park.
So it was going to be Mitchell Park.
No, it was
No.
Mitchell Park for years.
For years.
That's what the open property became
I see.
that was supposed to be built on.
So the building was supposed to be for mixed housing, right? Certain amount of housing for income, right? Lower income folk. Is that?
No, it was just going to be open to blacks with the purpose of attracting black residents, right?
Oh, that was the intent. So a good intent, right? People are welcome. Let's be a welcoming Deerfield village or city, whatever you all are, right?
Well, the city didn't have anything to do with it. It was a developer from New Jersey, right?
Uh-oh, I'm from New Jersey. Yeah.
It was a developer, I think,
Yeah.
from the east.
From the east.
Done something similar there.
Oh, okay.
He was going to do that here. It was a private thing. Deerfield,
I see.
The village was not involved at all.
Right.
Except
But then the word got out.
Then the word got out. What was the word? Not in my backyard, NIMBY, right?
that's it.
Wow.
It wouldn't allow a building permit.
That's what it was. That's when it got to.
Was passed, was on the village board of trustees.
Wow.
He voted against that
Yeah.
move,
Hmm.
and when it went through, he resigned from the
Wow.
board of trustees.
Wanted to preserve his integrity there, huh? Yeah. How about that? So you all are, as residents here, very familiar with that, right? That's kind of a thing. So, as your husband, as others knew, we're not for enforced segregation. We're for all God's people together, The story that Susan and maybe Maddie and I know from Princeton Seminary was that many generations back, the First Presbyterian Church had a fire and it burned, and so they had to rebuild the church. So they rebuild the church, and the white people come in and take their seats, and the black people come in and look up, and guess what wasn't there? There was no balcony. The old church had a balcony. The new church had no balcony. So the black people said, well, there's no place for us to sit. So they went down the street and formed Witherspoon Presbyterian Church. And to this day, First Church actually merged and became Nassau Street Presbyterian Church, but they're still down the street, not very far, Witherspoon Presbyterian Church, which is predominantly a black congregation. Now there may be some more integration today, but so this history is with all of us, right? Certainly here. Let's look a little bit at that handout that I gave you, which talks about, now go to the side that says, that says Belhar, right? So what do you notice, I don't have to read it all, but from the first paragraph, this is how the confessions, it's only 3 pages long if you want to download it. So we believe in the triune God, or the Trinitarian, and look what God does. Gathers, protects, cares for the church. This God has done since the beginning of the world and will do to the end. I like that, forever and ever and ever, world without end. Amen, right? Then I skipped some parts. Okay, and this is the part about unity. And look what they believe about unity, that it has to be manifest. That just means made real, right? In a variety of ways. Love, experience, practice, and pursue community. So an intentional effort to have community. To give ourselves for others. How about that, right? Not just for ourselves. Did you notice, again, I just have this coronation on my mind. The very first thing that happened in the coronation, when the king sat down, a young child says to him, "We welcome you in the name of the King of Kings." And Charles's response was, "I come in service of the King of Kings, who came not to be served, but to serve." I thought, wow, that's the very first word in that coronation service. And that's, of course, exactly from Jesus, right? Came not to be served, but to serve. So that's here. And we give ourselves to others. We share, look, all this one faith, one calling, one soul, one mind, one God and Father, one Spirit, one baptism, one bread, one cup, one name, blah, 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 blah. So these are all the things that we stand for. Then they have a lot of rejection language in some of our confessions. Therefore, because of this, we reject, and look what they reject. Any doctrine which, that's a big word, absolutizes either natural diversity or the sinful separation of people in such a way that this absolutization hinders or breaks the visible and active unity of the church, or even leads to the establishment of a separate church formation, which is, we saw the list earlier, right? These 4 different churches, right? So it'd be, first press, white people, second press, black people, third press, mixed race. We don't want that. We want one church, right? As much as we can. So then it's reject. Go ahead.
Are you speaking now of natural diversity or sinful separation?
Well, I think it says they're rejecting both, right? So this is what is rejected. We are rejecting anything that separates people, that the absolutization, what is that? Making it a rule that natural diversity and civil separation should be established. Rather, we're against any doctrine that breaks visible and active unity in the church. So it's very much a plus for diversity, right? Red and yellow, black and white, right? Does that make sense then? So that's what they're saying they're against.
Not to me, natural diversity or sinful separation of people would seem to be quite different.
Yes, I think it is quite different. So they're saying if there's a doctrine that says natural diversity should be not pursued. If there's a doctrine that separates people into different churches, those things are outside of the faith.